So let's continue our discussion of import set.
Rahul, give me a 2 minutes, okay? I mean, you can continue, and I'll just, hang on for 1 minute, okay?
The update set will not contain data per se. It will not carry data from one environment to another environment, but it
Okay.
will bring
Okay.
structural information.
All the templates,
Yeah, UI,
application,
the workflows,
application, all.
the client scripts, the business rules. These will be
Okay.
carried to the next environment using this update set.
So basically, we need to do it from the global environment. I mean global ID
Yeah, you should do that.
instead of default.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, so since we are talking about uh, setting up LDAP server, notice. So since we are talking about setting up an LDAP server, which is somewhere here, right? And this LDAP server doesn't have a public IP. Right? But let's assume that this is within my personal firewall. So this is in a network that I have. It may be possible that I have a private network, maybe a LAN. So this is within my LAN, and somewhere here I have my service now. ServiceNow Cloud. We have it here, right? And now my aspiration is that I connect my ServiceNow instance with this LDAP server. But to do that, I have to do several things. I have to get past this firewall that is created. So the firewall that I have here, my network is protected from the outside environment using this firewall. So you have to get through this firewall, right? Maybe I'll put this somewhere here, maybe. Right? Now, my aspiration is to talk to this LDAP. How do I do that? So there is one way of accomplishing that. So what I can do is I can put a server here, and allow external access to this server, which can bypass this firewall. So only this server has this external access to ServiceNow instance.
Oh,
And then what I can do is I can run a Java program from ServiceNow, which is MidServer program, which is known as, this is a Java program, this is known as MidServer program. So I can install that MidServer program here on this server. Now this MidServer program will proxy for ServiceNow Cloud Instance, and it can gather information from all the IT resources that I have within this LAN, this local area network. So if I
what
have,
is a mid server? But what is a mid server?
this is a
I mean,
program,
it's
this
okay.
is a
I mean, it's
program.
the server is okay. The server is like Linux instance.
It,
Okay.
it could be a Linux or it could be a Windows as well, right? Both is possible. So MidServer, if you go to your ServiceNow instance and type in MidServer within this application navigator, you will see one application which is MidServer, contains several modules into it. Now this MidServer is kind of a contract negotiator that will negotiate between your private network and the cloud service instance, ServiceNow instance that you have, right? And this is a program. So you create a server here within your LAN, put a server here within your LAN. It could be a Windows or Linux server. And then install the program which you download from here. I'm telling you this is a Java program. This can run on Windows Server. It can run on Linux, right? It is compatible to 32-bit architecture as well as 62-bit architecture on both Linux and Windows. So you download this program, bring that program onto this Mid server, install it here, provide some information into this server that is capable of interacting with this external interface, and then make use of this program that you run here to gather information from different servers that you have. For example, I can connect to this LDAP server using this mid server, right? So I can connect with this LDAP server using this mid server. I can connect with this database server using this mid server, right? I can connect with any other resource using this mid server. For example, any other resource that I have here within the LAN, I can connect with that using this mid server. Right. So we will talk about mid servers. We will configure mid server as well on Linux and on Windows as well, and we'll show you how to make use of mid servers. It's important to understand mid server from the import set perspective as well, because when you do import set and you identify data sources, there are options to use mid servers for LDAP and JDBC imports that you do. I'll show you. So yesterday we did Excel import, import from an Excel file. So we didn't have to specify any mid server. We just identified what file I had to choose to import data from, and then I identified the import set table, created the transform script, and then moved that transform data into the target table into ServiceNow. But then what if I have to not use the Excel file and I have to bring that information using some database directly? So for that you have to go into data sources, create data sources here, identify the import set table, choose the type of data source you want to create. For example, JDBC. JDBC is supposed to be used for database connections uh, to different databases. Let me show you. The databases could be MySQL, Oracle, or MySQL Server. So this JDBC connection you will have to use in order to connect to a MySQL database or an Oracle database or SQL Server database. So you choose your SQL database here, the format here. You provide the database name. For example, in this case, the database name would be training database that we were using from MySQL from here, right? And then the database port. So I know that usually MySQL works on the port 3306. So this is the port that it will be interacting. And then I'll identify a username here that will be utilized here. For example, I use a remote user and put a password for that remote user. Right? And then I'll have to provide information about which database server I need to interact with. Right? So the database server in this case is the IP address is this one. So I may take this option information from here and I'll go back and provide this server IP address here. And this is the public IP address of the Linux server that I'm talking about. Right? So that if you provide these information, your ServiceNow instance will understand which server it has to point to and what database it has to refer to and what table it has to refer to. For example, within
And
the
if it is, sorry, Rahul.
yeah
So if it is my local machine, then I have to give local host or something like that.
local machine as in
Yeah, and if it is, if I don't have the IP address to my server,
mm,
so what should I give? Is
if
machine
you do
name
not
for the
if you
server?
if you do not have a public IP address, how will you do that? You must need then the mid server, right? If your database server does not have a public IP address, then you will have to make use of the mid server, and that connection will go through the mid server to import data.
So we have to. Okay, so
So there
what
are
I'm
two ways
thinking
to
is,
it. two ways to it. Either your database server or LDAP server has a public IP address, or you install a MidServer within your LAN, and that MidServer should have a public IP address so that your instance can interact with it. Now this can be treated as a security as well, because you are using a proxy here, reverse proxy or something. So your ServiceNow instance tries to access this LDAP information, but cannot do because it does not have a public IP address. It is not exposed and open to the outside world. So you'll proxy using the MidServer program that you have here, which is authorized to do this interaction. And this interaction between MidServer and the LDAP server, or MidServer and the database server, these can be done to pull data from this LDAP server to this MidServer, and MidServer sends that data to ServiceNow instance. Now, the data
So
that you transport from LDAP to MidServer is not encrypted, so we must ensure that we know this information. Between these two servers, the data is not encrypted, but between MidServer and ServiceNow, the data is encrypted. So you have security, taken care when you talk about MidServer and this. Right. Go ahead with your question, please.
no, I think you answered my question. So I think for any server we need a mid server to connect it basically.
Unless you have a public IP address to that server. If you have a public IP address server, you do not need to fill this information of the MidServer here. Right. So in this case, in this example that we are taking, so this is a Amazon EC2 instance I have, and I have a public IP address for this. So it means that publicly anybody can use this IP address. So if I do, my IP address is this. So if you ping this IP address, you will also be able to ping this IP address, right? Because this is a public IP address that I have, right? I'm not talking about the internal IPs that the server might contain into the Amazon VPC. The internal IP address will look something like this: 172.3149.178. So I'm not talking about this internal IP address. Rather, I'm talking about external IP address, which is exposed to the outside world, which is this one. All right. So if your server has a public IP address which is accessible by anybody outside your LAN, then you do not need this MidServer, right? But if you do not have that, get your MidServer set up on a server within your LAN, right, which can bypass the firewall that you have set up. And the firewalls are there to make sure that you restrict unauthorized access to your resources within your LAN or WAN from the outside world. So you do not want to expose that. So you put that firewall. So it has to negotiate negotiate the credentials first, negotiate the access, and then it will allow you to find out all the information from the resources you have. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, understand.
Yes. Now, so let's assume that we do not need the MidServer right now, right? Because my server has a public IP address which I have here. I do not need a hang on. I do not need a MidServer that is required to pull data from this server. Alright. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my other instance where I have a data source created already. So I created an attendee data source for me, which is attendee ds mysql, and then IP address here. The type is JDBC. I put certain information in here. The name of the data source, the import set table, attendee, u_attendee. Type is JDBC. And without using MidServer, I am choosing the MySQL format here. The database name is training. Database port is 3306. Username is remote user, and I provided the password for it. The server IP address is this, and I want to query all rows from the table. So it will select star from this table, right? So it will show all the records that I have into that table. Other option was specific SQL. So you can put something like select uh, start from attendee where fee greater than 500, something like that, right? So if you run this one, so you will have lesser number of you know records, like 3-4 records here, 5 records, right? If I do not have, I'll see all the records from the table. So if you want to fire specific query, if I do select all, I have 9 records. If I do that for fee greater than 500, I have 5 records. So if you choose a specific SQL, it will only get the qualified record from the database and then insert into the import set table, right? For now, I leave it as all rows from table. I put the query timeout and connection timeout to 30 seconds, just to make sure that if my connection to the MySQL server is not established within 30 seconds of time, then it will time out and log appropriate uh, error message into the logger. So that's why I have the query timeout and connection timeout. And then I identified the table name, which is attendee in this case, right? And then you have the last checkbox here, which is use last run date time, right? So this is for differential data, meaning the delta data that you want to import. So if you do last run date time and you put the last run date time and last run database field, then you will be able to, so if you put, let's say if you put last run date time as today, and tomorrow you run the same data source, you run the same import set, then it will take all the newer data that you create after today. After this time, if you create a new data, it will only take those data, differential data, the delta data into the consideration and not all of the data. So that's why you have used last run date time here. Now, there's one issue that I'm facing right now. Uh, when I have two options here, test load 20 records and load all records. So let's test the connection and see if this connection is working fine. I'm going to go back and not save that information there. Now, if I do test load 20 records, the problem is the remote user that I have chosen, I need to authorize that user into this MySQL database. So, because I am able to ping that server 52.87.192.192.211, but the connection is refused for that server, meaning MySQL is not authorizing connection to that user. So I'll have to do certain changes into this database here, and I'll have to make sure that, are you guys with me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Then I'll have to go into, I have a user table. I have to create this user table here. And then I'll have to configure my database so that it understands the incoming network connections, and it allows the TCP connection to be established between the MySQL uh, database, my MySQL database, and the ServiceNow connection that I'm making. So some tweaking, some changes I need to do on MySQL end. Uh, I think I'll do that later. I could not do that because I had little time doing that. So I'll do that later. But to establish this connection, this is what all you need to do. This is how you create a data source. Hang on. Right. All you need to do is to define your data source in this way, bring all your information to connect with the MySQL database. If you have to connect with Oracle database, then you will choose Oracle here, and you know that Oracle database usually operates on port number 1521. So 1521 port will be there, and then you have to provide the Oracle system identifier here within this Oracle's SID property, so that whatever server where you have Oracle database installed, it will identify the appropriate system identifier, and then you will provide the information about the users and schemas and the table name, and then it will connect to it. if it is to be connected to MySQL server, Microsoft SQL Server, then you have to put the SQL Server name here, the instance name, right? The database instance name, the database name and port. The rest of the things remain same, right? So this was of type JDBC. If you have to connect it to an LDAP server, then you have to choose LDAP, and then the LDAP target that you identified earlier, maybe here, LDAP servers, or you can identify the LDAP target directly from here. So you will have to do LDAP OU definitions. So you will create this LDAP OU definitions. So things like, the domain name and all those information, the OC and all, U informations that we have to provide. I don't know what those information is from the LDAP perspective, but we need to get that information here. We need to put those information here and then put the server IP address or something which will interact with that LDAP server and get information for us. Right? So if we do that, we identify the LDAP target here and do test load, it will fetch out information from the LDAP server and then get you the data that you require. Right? So that's how you do set up your data sources. So we talked about, uh, sorry. So we talked about doing a data connection with MySQL database, uh, Oracle on the same lines. I may take a couple of minutes to resolve this, authentication issue on the MySQL server, but I'll have to look into certain help blogs, certain information. I'll have to Google that. So I'll reserve this for tomorrow. I'll fix this issue and then maybe I'll send you an email to start doing that. Um, so you can do that. So I'll do that. I'll send you that information. So just the tweaking needed on the MySQL end. All right. So let's assume that you created this data source and you you tested the connection and it was successful. And now you want to schedule this data source on a daily basis. So for that you have to go into the scheduled imports and then you have to choose new and then you have to pick the data source that you want to pick. So for example, I can pick this attendee data source here. And I know that attendee data source was supposed to bring data from the attendees table. So it will keep repeating the, import from the attendee table and keep pushing it to the table, the target table that we have identified here into the ServiceNow environment, right? And then I do a frequency set here. I set a frequency of daily, weekly, monthly, periodically, or after parent runs, whatever frequency you want to identify for it. And the timing when you want to set that scheduled import. So you put that information here. If you want to do it conditionally, only on a specific condition, so you can put a script here as well, right? So whatever condition you want to set, you can write a script and then you can set that up, right? Then you can set your pre-script, pre-import script and post-import script as well. For example, let's assume that when you import data into the system, before importing that, you want to modify the data a little bit, right? So you will do, you will write some script here from the source record. So source and target will be available here. These two objects will be available here that you may use, source and target. So using these target source and target objects and the column names, the fields that you have identified into the ImportSet table and the target table, you can put your pre-script or your post script which will modify the type of data that you want to insert into the target tables. So that's also available. So when I get that running, when I get this MySQL database connection running, I'll show you an example of pre-script and post script as well, along with a conditional statement that will govern how to import data into the environment. Okay. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about MidServer, right? And we talked about it's a program. And we saw that diagram where we found a scenario where mid servers could be used when we do not have our servers exposed to outside world. So let's quickly see how this mid server can be configured. Is it really a complex activity that we need to do to configure mid servers, or is it a simple one? So let's find out whether this this mid server is a complex setup for us or something else. So I'll go and type in mid server. When I type in mid server, and we'll talk about different uses of mid server later. Right now, our discussion is circumferencing the import set. We are only considering mid server in view of import sets, imports from different environments. So we are talking in context of mid servers only, only for the import sets. Now, different modules available within mid server, and it has installation instruction. When you click on it, it will open up the docs.servicenow.com, open up the help manual for the mid server installation. You can get that information from here. To download the package, you will go in here and then click on these links according to your system where you want to install the MidServer program, according to the system architecture or system architecture. You will download the appropriate program and install it on that server. Right? I know that my server is a Linux Ubuntu box with 64-bit architecture, so the applicable program for my server is the 64-bit Linux one. So I'll copy this URL here and I'll go back onto my Linux server, and so I have to download that package here, right? Mid server program here. So what I'll do is I'll do a wget, and then I have copied that URL. So I'll download that program here on my root directory. So it has started downloading the program, which is a mid-server Helsinki 360 in 2016 patch 4.8.10.26, Linux x86 64.zip. So this file is getting downloaded on my PC, on my server. So after this program is downloaded, I'll extract that. Since this is a zip file, I'll extract that program and get the files out of it. On the same lines, if you have a Windows PC, you will download the applicable Windows program example, and this is a 155 MB program that I am downloading right now. Right. So I'll download it, extract it, and see what it contains, and then we'll have to put it in some appropriate directories on our server, and then do some configuration, and then run it. See, the mid server runs as a Windows service in the Windows environment, and a Unix daemon into the Unix environment. Right. So it's a background process that runs. There is no interface that you will see, no user interface to this program. It's a background service, a background program that will run into your services that you install on your Windows PC or Unix daemon as you install it there. So for example, if I open the services window here, so if you install the MidServer program, it will come somewhere on the PC and will be installed here on the MidServer, and then to start that program, you will have to open that batch process here and then hit start, after you provide the login information to the user there, right? All right, so I think it's about to be downloaded here on the Linux. It is taking some time here on Windows environment. So let's wait for a couple of minutes here. So the configuration is really very simple. Um, we just need to remember a couple of configuration points that we need to do on the mid server end, and we should be able to set this up for use for different activities. This MidServer can be, if you go back to the instance, you will see that this MidServer can be used in service mapping. Service mapping is an application, a module available here. We'll, we may touch base on it. We may slightly talk about service mapping, although this is not part of the training. Orchestration, we use MidServer. Discovery, we use MidServer. MidServer, here we are identifying it. MidServer can also be utilized in some other areas. So there are different uses for MidServer that we'll be using.
So
Um,
Rahul, when we install this MidServer for
mhm,
Windows, so our
mhm.
local machine could be considered as a server, right? Isn't it?
If your local machine has a public IP address, you can access it
Then
on the.
only.
No, your local machine, see, the program will still run, but in order that the ServiceNow instance interacts with that mid-server program, you must have an public IP address. If you do not have, then it will not be able to access it. See, I'll tell you why. See, if I go to the servers list here, see, I already have that mid-server configured on my Linux box. I just wanted to show
Mhm.
you. I downloaded this package. Now I have this package here, the mid-server program, mid.helsinki. This program was downloaded today, right?
Mhm.
And then what I've done is I have already done this configuration. So I created a ServiceNow folder. So if you see, I do a ls and I should have a ServiceNow folder here. So this is the ServiceNow folder. If I go to the ServiceNow folder here, there is a agent folder within ServiceNow folder. I go into the agent folder and I do ls. So I see a directory listing of all the programs, all the files and folders available within the agent folder, right? And within this agent folder, I'm not sure if you are able to see this. Within this agent folder, I have a config.xml. So I'll open this config.xml file where all the configuration related to XML, related to this mid server is lying. So if I open this config.xml file, I'll see all these details, all this information which is required here for the mid server, that contains all the information related to the mid server. And here within it, I am identifying my ServiceNow instance by providing the URL, right? So by doing this, I am teaching my mid-server program here on the Linux box that you have to interact with this ServiceNow instance, right? And then I'm providing my ServiceNow user information. So I created a user into ServiceNow instance here. If I go to user administration, I created a user here within ServiceNow and I named it as SNC mid server.
That's a service account you created,
Yeah, I
basically.
created a service account for this mid server. So this service now, SNCM mid server service account I created, and you can find it here, SNCM mid server. I provided the password to it, which is now encrypted. The mid server program automatically encrypts it. So I provided this password to it as well. With the password that I set here, I provided it here. And if you see, if you scroll down, you will see that I provided this mid server role to this user, the mid server role, right? So this is important. This user, this service account will only have the mid server role to it, right? So I provided this mid server role to this user. It brought all the related roles along with it, which is listed out here. So I have 15 roles associated to this SNC mid server service account. Um, you know, so I provided that role. I created the user, got the username and password here. Then I went ahead and named this mid server with a string. So I named it as TUR AWS instance Ubuntu 16.04 production, right? And this is what
Mhm.
is getting displayed into the mid server listing here I have onto my ServiceNow instance. So if I list my mid servers configured here, I can see that TUR AWS instance Ubuntu 16.04 is available here. Now can I
And
have
now you can
yeah, go ahead.
now you can use that mid server when you are configuring data sources. So like
Yes,
if you want to, okay.
yes. Now I have my mid server configured here. I go to import set, data sources. I open this one. And if I use the use mid server, I open this lookup and I can find out my mid server instance here. I can select this one. So by selecting this one, my calls will now be routed through the MidServer that I have identified, right? So all
Mm-hmm.
requests to this MySQL server will go through that program.
But still, we need to provide the SQL Server,
Yes,
yeah, SQL
yes.
Server IP
For
address
data import
that
from
it will.
MySQL, you have to provide. See this IP address. Yeah, we still need to provide that information.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, because that is database information that you have to provide. Now,
Mm-hmm.
let's go back to the MidServer. Now, there are some more configuration items that you have to take care here. For example, the maximum threads. So right now I have left it as default 25. So the number of maximum threads this MidServer program can process as of now is 25, right? This is the default one. So it is a multi-threaded application, so it can take more than more processes at a time. And then the MidServer, when it was started, it automatically populated the MidServer sysID from the ServiceNow instance. So if I copy this sysID from here and paste it here, so sysID is 2NF61E14, and it will be exactly the same that we have here. 29F61E14DB3A, all this ID information that we have here, right? And the
So
key,
we are just adding one more layer of accessing the database server
yes,
here, right?
yes, yes, right? So this is like Vibhishan, who was, passing all the information to Lord Rama, and you know, and that way, Ram and his Sena could get information from, Vibhishan, which was, really crucial for them to win the,
Mm-hmm. War.
battle that they had, right? So mid-server is that
Mm.
Vibhishana who is getting information from Lanka, right? So that's a very, generalistic, very oversimplified analogy that I brought for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a layering that you put, but then it allows you to access different resources from your own enterprise network. Okay. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you are done with putting all these 4 5 configuration items here, see there are more options, more parameters available, but for the default configuration, you do not need all these parameters to be put in there. So these parameters are kept commented, right? You do not need it uncommented as of now because the requirement that we have is it doesn't require that to be done. All right. Now that I have my configuration done, how do I start this program? So if it was Windows, I could have used this start.bat or stop.bat to start and stop the program in Windows environment. But since it is Unix, so I'll have to run this shell script. And the shell script to start the program in Linux is start.sh. To start it, I'll have to be in the same directory where start.sh is kept or stop.sh is kept. And then I'll have to do dot slash, which is the generalistic approach of running the shell script programs that you have there. So I'll first stop it because my MidServer program is running right now. So I'll do stop.sh. But before I do that, I'll show you within the MidServer list here, you can see that the status of my MidServer program is up and it is validated. Last refresh is 29/11/2016 at 18:19 hours. Right? If I refresh this, these stats will be updated. It changed to 18:24 hours, the last refresh time. The status is still up. Now I am going to the Linux server and I am going to stop this program. So this is basically a shell script program which is stopping the mid-server program. It stopped the mid-server program, confirmed it here, stopped the mid-server. And then if I go back and refresh the list, see the status comes to down, right? So it continues to interact with the mid-server program. It continues to gather information from the mid-server program constantly, right? So the moment I refresh this instance, it brought the status to down, right? And it will not provide any further information, any updated information until you bring that server up, right? So if I open this information, I'll have more detailed information about the MidServer, the information that my ServiceNow instance has gathered from the MidServer program, all those information are stored here. So these are the MidServer program contains probing scripts as well. It will probe your environment, it will probe information about your server and get the information out of it. For example, the IP address you see here, it's 172.31.49.178, which is the private IP address for my server. If I if I do ifconfig, you will see the private IP address is 172.31.49.178. Did we provide this information to the MidServer program on ServiceNow? No, I didn't provide that information here in the instance. It was gathered by the MidServer program. It probed all the necessary informations and passed that information out to the My ServiceNow instance. And those information are now recorded here and can be displayed here. Right? So this IP address is getting populated automatically from the program here. The router information, which is 172.31481, it should also be here somewhere. I think there's some other command which can be utilized to get that router information. So that information is also getting passed here. The network ID, the ports, the different ports, the host OS, uh, the version of the MidServer program which is installed on this server, all this information gets stored here. The properties that we set into the configuration file, those properties, configuration parameters are displayed here. So it shows me that I have set only these parameters on the MidServer program. The MidServer sysid, name, username, URL, thread max, and password. So the number of parameters you set there will be displayed here as well. There are other things like IP ranges, where you can identify different IP ranges to which you want to want to isolate probing, etc. For example, within your network, let's say you have a very wide network within your enterprise, and your network contains let's say 1,000 PCs, and these 1,000 PCs have IP addresses starting from 10.10.0.1, and it goes to, let's say, 1,000 is more, so let's say it goes to 10.10.0.254, and then it starts with another IP range or something, 10.120, some vague IP address I am creating here just to make sure that we have enough IP addresses to cover this scenario. So let's assume that these are the IP addresses identified. So 1,000 PCs are there, but I do not want to probe all those 1,000 PCs. I only want to probe a specific subset of that PC. So what you can do is you can identify the IP addresses and put a range on here. You can create an IP range, and that IP range you can probe into the environment and get that information from that IP range. So you will have to create IP ranges, store that IP range information here, and probe according to the IP ranges that you defined there. Right? So there are more to it, and that depends how you want to probe into your ID network. You will have to set up all these MidServer properties there to get that information out. Right? Now let's go back and for sake of example, I'm going to start this MidServer program again. So I'll have to do /start sh, and I do that, and it is starting my MidServer program, and it is started with a process ID. So if process ID 8238. So if I do a top command here, you will see that the MidServer program will now be running. It will be somewhere. See this ServiceNow agent? It is running on a multiple threads. So right now, see this ServiceNow threads are opened. The process IDs are here. So it is multi-threaded program, because it shows here that multiple programs are running, multiple threads are running here, which is processing the information, sending out information from this server to the ServiceNow instance, and it will continuously be active and send information to the ServiceNow instance somehow.
So just to make a connection to the data server doesn't pull the data, right? You need to actually write a schedule import for that, right?
Right, right. Scheduled import is necessary. So a scheduled import is only necessary when if you want to import data on a periodic interval, right? If you do not want to do a periodic import, you just want to do one-time import, then you do not need to create a scheduled import, right? So,
Okay, so that connection also makes pull the data also, that because you, that's why you are written that query there.
right,
Okay. So it will connect as well as pull the data.
right. It will pull data when you do load data, load records from the import set. So if you do import sets, go to data sources, you have UA action available here, which is load all records. So when you hit load all records, it will bring one time record from the database, pull all the records and bring that data into the database, right?
Okay.
All right. So today we talked about creating data sources and we talked about the MidServer. We still have certain topics left, certain information we need to share on the load data and data sources and import sets along with MidServer. So we'll talk about that tomorrow.